Hey, what's going on guys, Chris here, and there's a pretty nice update that's not long been released for Battlefield 5, an update that not only kicks off a new season of Tides of War, giving us new challenges, weapons and other stuff to unlock, along with more content and a new game mode called Squad Conquest, which is basically a smaller 32 version of Conquest that kinda plays out like Domination, but more importantly brings along a bunch of improvements and long awaited bug fixes to balance things out better and generally make the game less frustrating to play. Unfortunately, this isn't the update that's going to solve all of Battlefield 5's problems, like, say, the visibility issues, but it's definitely something that'll push the game closer to where it needs to be. And as time goes on and more updates are thrown out, I'm pretty sure it'll get there in the end. Hopefully. There's a hell of a lot of alterations and improvements in the Lightning Strikes update, from subtle tweaks and fixes to bigger changes which actually make certain things like weapons, gadgets and even gameplay mechanics a lot more effective. And it's these bigger changes that I'm going to be focusing more so in this video. So let's get on with it. So starting off with one of the simpler improvements that might not really seem like a noticeable one at first, is the whole vaulting through windows thing that's been frustrating players since day one. There's probably been loads of times where you've been running around in a building, frantically trying to escape from a squad of enemies chasing you down while you reload. You dash over to a nearby window, attempt to dive through it to safety, only to start humping the window ledge instead, giving those enemies a nice opportunity to light you up. Vaulting through windows has been one of the small but much welcome mechanics coming into Battlefield 5 from Battlefield 1, where you literally had to destroy about 5 different struts of wood first before you could get through the bloody thing. It's a great step up from Battlefield 1's window breaking mechanics, as it lets the gameplay flow a lot more smoothly and allows you to access areas a lot quicker than before. Well, that was the idea anyway, because vaulting in Battlefield 5 could still be a frustrating thing that often didn't work, especially at times where you really needed it to. Thankfully, this has been on DICE's to-do list for a while, and it's actually been improved to work as intended, as now you can vault through windows from tighter angles and don't have to be facing it directly in order for the mechanic to work properly. Something to please all those recon players out there, the throwing knives no longer suck. They've been in a bit of an awkward place for a while, being a bit too OP during the earlier alpha stages to being pretty rubbish from the game's release. They were still very usable, but often not good enough to use as an alternative to other throwables, or even your secondary weapon in a lot of close quarter fights. This is down to a couple of things, the main one being the range, which you could inflict maximum damage to kill an enemy in one hit. Before it was only set at a measly 6.5 meters, so you pretty much had to be right next to your opponent to kill them with one knife throw. And to make matters worse, if you missed the first one or didn't deal enough damage to kill straight away, then there was a painfully long delay before you could lob another one to seal the deal. Throwing knives can already be tricky things to get the hang of, with their throwing delay and the speed they fly through the air, but these factors just made them seem too ineffective for players to consider using. The knive's maximum damage has now been increased to 10 meters, allowing them to be more usable slightly further away, and the delay between consecutive knife throws has been cut down by 40%. Giving you another chance to kill should your first knife stray off target. Another huge improvement that's going to make a lot of recon players happy is the fact that the spotting flare now does exactly what it should. In Battlefield 1, the spotting flare was the most crucial gadget in a scout's arsenal, as it literally let them see where all the enemies were hiding around objective points, and let their team see them all too, giving everyone on your side a massive tactical advantage. Moving over to Battlefield 5, where 3D spotting is basically dead, and there's very limited ways in which you can highlight enemy players on the minimap, the spotting flare seemed like the go-to option at first. But the big problem was its radius was stupidly small, usually only allowing you to spot an enemy or two in a tiny space. It was a massive downgrade from Battlefield 1's flare, and it just wasn't worth equipping or using in 99% of all cases. The Lightning Strikes update has since given these spotting flares a much needed boost in scale, covering a much wider area on the minimap when you fire one off high into the air. And although they're not quite as effective as the ones in Battlefield 1, which could be fired on the floor with the same effect, and seem to stay active for longer, the spotting flares in Battlefield 5 now feel a lot more beneficial, and I'd definitely recommend you use them more so from now on. The Revolver Mark 6 wasn't all that bad before. It dealt a reasonable amount of damage in CQC, and it could get the job done most of the time, as long as you were accurate and close to your enemy. But the new update has buffed the Mark 6, giving it a lot more range that just might make it a more popular choice over some of the other sidearms for some players, especially recon players who desperately need a strong sidearm to help them out in sticky situations up close. The gun fires at a fairly slow pace of 200 RPM, and before it'd kill quite slowly against players straying beyond CQC. The fact that it could often take a few bullets to bring someone down here, and with the Revolver only having a capacity of 6 shots, just didn't give it much appeal. But now this range has been boosted, so it can now kill in 2 shots up to 12 meters from 7 meters. Its free hit kill range has been extended up to 30 meters from 12 meters, which is a massive difference, and it can now kill in 4 bullets up to the range of 50 meters instead of 30. And the minimum damage of the gun is now 22 from 15. Another huge step up, which now allows you to kill an enemy at any range in 5 shots, whereas before it could have taken up to 7, which is more than what the Revolver was capable of carrying. So a lot of people have been complaining about how badly the SMGs generally perform compared to a lot of the other guns in the game. They're weaker than most of the other fully automatics, and they didn't really perform very well against players over distance. It's a bit tricky for DICE to properly balance SMGs in terms of their power output, as if you increase their range and allowed them to dish out more damage further away, then they'd be too strong, and they'd be more in line with the assault rifles and the LMGs. SMGs are supposed to be weaker over longer distances, so increasing their range wouldn't have really made a lot of sense or fit in with the game's meta. So instead of doing this, DICE have instead decided to alter the SMG's spread and recoil, basically making them all a bit more accurate in the process, when both firing from the hip and whilst aiming down sights. This allows you to land more shots on target a little bit easier, ultimately helping to increase kill times without directly affecting damage output. SMGs are still going to feel pretty weak against opponents further away, like they probably should, but having a higher accuracy due to lower spread values makes them a lot more usable now, which nicely balances them with the other gun types. Something that's been missing from Battlefield 5 is the idea of being able to hear nearby enemies using their footsteps, which stops them from getting the drop on you and gives you a chance to fight back. Listening out for footsteps has been a big tactical mechanic in past Battlefield games, and having extra audio cues really helps out in a lot of close quarter battles, giving you a bit more awareness of your surroundings, and helping to alert you of a nearby enemy who's rushing up from behind, preparing to shove a knife through the back of your head. Well, with the latest update, footsteps are now once again a thing that can be used to your advantage in those CQC fights. And with Battlefield 5 already lacking a means of knowing your enemy's whereabouts due to the death of 3D spotting, this is a much welcomed feature to return once again. Quite a lot of people actually think the updates made the footsteps a bit too loud. Maybe there's still a little bit of audio balancing that DICE needs to work on to get it spot on. But it's definitely a big improvement over the non-existent footsteps in the game before. Another weapon that's been specifically buffed to a certain degree is the M1907 SF, which was pretty effective at taking down players one at a time, but its low ammo capacity and high rate of fire just made it a bit of a pain in the arse to use in heated situations, often putting you at a major disadvantage, making it a fairly frustrating gun to do well with. With that said, it was definitely a very powerful gun before, perhaps a bit too effective against players further away. So for that reason, it's been given a bit of extra vertical recoil for good measure, bumped up from 0.68 to 0.82. This might sound like a big problem for the M1907, but it's been given its extended magazine at default to make up for it. The M1907 had an extended mag specialization before, but this has now been replaced with the recoil buffer instead, which basically helps to reduce that extra vertical recoil gained in the patch. The fact that you no longer have to choose between a higher mag size or better hipfire now makes the hipfire specializations on the other side of the tree a bit more beneficial, as the extended mags option was too much of a deal breaker for the M1907 before on the other side. So this nicely balances things out, generally making the M1907 more usable for everyone and giving its specializations a bit more balance. Next up is one of the smaller, more subtle additions that just makes weapon selection flow a lot more smoothly. A lot of you might not have even noticed, but on the loadout screen, there's now arrows next to the weapon icons that let you click left and right using these arrows or by using the D-pad to quickly scroll through the weapons in that class. Before, you'd actually have to click on the primary, secondary or melee weapon tabs and then choose your choices from a list, which still might be the best way to go about designing your class if you're putting one together, but it can now be much quicker to just scroll to the gun or melee weapon you want to use without having to click on that tab first. This isn't exactly a game-changing thing, but it's definitely a nice feature that'll help when navigating around the menus and equipping weapons, especially if you're mid-game and need to pick another weapon fast to get back into the action a lot quicker. Something to make things a bit fairer now, the scope glint has been altered so that different optics transmit different amounts of glint. The high-powered scopes are going to give off larger amounts of glint that's easier to see, whereas the medium-ranged optics will have less. So this is mainly going to benefit recon players, by giving them more incentive to use the medium-powered scopes over the high-powered ones, giving them an added advantage for doing so. Scope glint will also now start to seem a bit further away, so players using scopes at earlier ranges won't just stick out like a sore thumb anymore, and the mid-range scope's glint will actually drop off over longer distances, making players using them harder to spot, as a trade-off for them being a bit more difficult to use. So generally, these improvements to the game's scope glint is going to make things seem a bit fairer, and make the lower powered scopes a bit more beneficial to use. So one of the biggest problems Battlefield 5 has suffered from since the very beginning is the time it takes to die. Dying often felt very unfair, due to the on-screen information not correlating properly to what's happening, and basically making it harder to determine when you're taking damage and from what position. Quite a few improvements have been rolled out in this update. Visual improvements, like the fact that the tracers from bullets can now be seen more accurately from the shooter, letting you spot someone firing their gun off more consistently. And tweaks to the UI as well, making the directional damage indicator function better when it should, with it now pointing properly towards the position you're taking damage from. And it should also appear on the screen quicker too, without being delayed. One of the big reasons why dying often felt too quick, because that damage indicator just wasn't working as intended. With these fixes in place, dying now seems a little bit fairer and less questionable, and I'm pretty sure it's something that Battlefield players are going to really appreciate from now on. So there's quite a lot of new improvements in the Lightning Strikes update. These are just a few of the more notable ones that I think are worth pointing out the most, though I do suggest checking out the entire list of changes on Battlefield website if you want to know about all the things that have been altered and all the bugs that have been squashed. Hope you enjoyed the video, thumbs up if you did, and make sure you subscribe to stay updated with loads more Battlefield content, along with the weapon guides coming in the future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in that next video.